Hey, what is up everybody? My name is Timo and this is OnePlus 8. Now, OnePlus has always been known to make great phones for the price by making just the right trade-offs to give you a cheap phone while also keeping that premium experience and quality of the phone. And while their prices have risen over the years progressively, this still holds true today and with this phone. In fact, let me show you the differences between this and its bigger brother OnePlus 8 Pro, which is about $300 more expensive. Now in terms of design, they're very similar. The front is completely the same and the back is just a little bit different in terms of the camera array, and the OnePlus 8 Pro is a little bit taller by 0.2 inches. That aside, they're basically the same. Also, this has a slightly lower resolution and lower refresh rate display than the OnePlus 8 Pro. The other differences are that this does not have an official IP rating, it has a slightly smaller battery, it doesn't have wireless charging, it has a slightly different and worse camera layout, and less efficient and slower memory, and a $300 price difference. So yeah, on paper there definitely are some differences, but let's see how important they actually are in real life. Let's start off with the most subjective, which is the design. And as I've said, they're actually very similar, there's barely any difference between the two, being that this one is 0.2 inches smaller and has a different camera layout and one less camera. But other than that, they have the same sort of design language that previous OnePlus phones have had over the last couple of years. Now what you should note is that at 6.55 inches, this is not exactly a small phone and you might have some trouble fitting it in your pockets. The next slight difference is that this does not have an official IP rating, as I've said before. However, they did put the same seals as in the OnePlus 8 Pro around the SIM card tray and stuff like that. So it's basically just as waterproof as OnePlus 8 Pro, but they have not put it through the necessary testings in order to save money essentially. But they've done that in the past as well. And for OnePlus 7 Pro, they threw that phone into a bucket of water during the presentation or for the presentation. And you might have seen Dave2D do the exact same thing to test out if it's actually waterproof or not. And that phone survived, so I wouldn't recommend to go swimming with it, but let's say it falls into a puddle or something, it's gonna be just fine. Okay, quick side note. Coming from the OnePlus 6, this fingerprint sensor on the back is way superior to the optical fingerprint sensor on here. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely more convenient to have it on the front, so you don't have to pick it up every time you want to unlock it. But at times I've noticed it being very inaccurate to the point where I genuinely got annoyed by how bad it worked. But I'm hoping that this is just a one-time thing and not common among all OnePlus 8s. This phone you can get with either 8 or 12 gigs of LPDDR4X memory. It's slightly less efficient and slower than the memory on the OnePlus 8 Pro, but it's still going to be just fine. And in terms of performance, everything feels very smooth and snappy and responsive, just as OnePlus's marketing strategy is called fast and smooth. This very much translates into this phone, as it should. But you do have to keep in mind that you don't really notice these performance issues right when you get the phone, but rather in 2-3 years down the line. But because I've used the OnePlus 6 for 2 years, I can say that at least on here, I haven't had any major performance issues. So I'm guessing this is going to be just as fine and actually hold up a little bit better because of the better chip. Now, the battery in here is 4300 mAh, and at first I was a bit afraid that it wasn't enough. But over the time I noticed that this fear was irrational and 4300 mAh is basically enough and gets me through the day fairly well. Because I could end the day at 10 or 11 PM with about 10-15% battery left. And sometimes up to even over 7 hours of screen on time, running the screen at 90 Hz on full brightness with GPS and Bluetooth enabled all the time. So yeah, no concerns there. And if you ever notice that this does not get you through a whole day, you can always set the refresh rate to 60 Hz instead of 90 Hz and get significantly better battery life. But if you don't want to do this, you can always plug it in for a couple of minutes and get quite a lot of battery back. However, you cannot just toss it on a wireless charger at your desk at work or something, because this does not have wireless charging compatibility, so you're limited to wired charging here. Now this battery has to power the 1080p 90Hz screen on the front, which is the most beautiful screen that I've ever used, but I know that Samsung screens are just better They are more color accurate, they have a higher refresh rate, but I've never dailied one of those phones yet. Now the worst part of the phone, in my opinion, are the cameras. What you're getting here is a 48 megapixel main camera, a 16 megapixel ultra wide and a 2 megapixel macro lens. And considering what they wanted to do with this phone, it is very obvious that they had to make some sacrifices with the camera as well. But then they toss a 2 megapixel macro camera in here. This has to be, out of all cameras and sensors, one of the most useless, because not only it's just 2 megapixels and therefore not the greatest quality, but you can get a better result with the main camera when you just get really close to the object and just take a photo and crop in a bit. And I'm guessing that the macro lens is one of the cheapest lenses you can get, and just toss it in there to make it look a little bit more modern and higher quality, because we associate more cameras with better quality at this point. Like, modern phones don't really just have 2 cameras anymore, except for like the iPhone 11, but other than that you see phones with 3, 4, 5 cameras on the back all the time. So we just associate this with better quality, and I'm guessing that that's the reason why they threw in this camera. Now, more important than that is how the cameras hold up, and the main camera is pretty decent, as OnePlus's cameras have always been. They've always been quite good, but not the best. Now, the main camera shoots good photos when you're in daylight. You get very accurate colors, you get very good dynamic range, but the contrast at times can be a little bit too aggressive, making the scene appear a bit darker than it actually was when you shot it, which is just something to keep in mind. When switching to the ultra-wide camera though, you can see that sometimes the white balance and the color temperature are a little bit different. On the ultra-wide, they're just a little bit more flat overall, but sometimes you can get great results with that camera as well. This inconsistency is just a little bit thing to keep in mind. If you take away the light though and move into like low light situations, things start to fall apart a bit, because pictures tend to get very noisy with this phone. As long as you don't use their night mode, which is called Nightscape, which does get rid of some of the noise and just makes the pictures a little bit brighter overall. But even then you're not going to get rid of the noise completely. Also, sometimes the dynamic range suffers a bit, which results in overexposed highlights. Now, the portrait shots on this one are pretty decent, again as they've always been. It does fairly well at detecting the subjects, although sometimes the edge detection is a little bit off, resulting in parts of your subject being out of focus. And if you want to take selfie portraits, then just keep in mind that the dynamic range suffers there as well, resulting again in overexposed highlights and overall not the greatest looking images. What really annoys me though is that when recording video, it is just so cropped in. Like, you have to get away from an object in order to get it fully into the frame. Now, you can activate super stable mode and record with the ultra wide camera there at 4K 30 or 1080p 30, but that's also quite a big deal because it limits you to 30 FPS only. That aside, video does look very good on here. Like, obviously it's not the greatest, it's not on par with like an iPhone 11 Pro, but it does fairly well, especially for the price. And I think for like the average person, it will get them through the day, through everything they want to shoot or record without a problem. But if you're very serious about camera quality, you might want to consider other alternatives instead. One thing I do want to quickly mention is that I've read a few complaints online that if you're a decent human being and wear a mask in public, the phone tends to unlock despite half of your face being covered. And I've tried that out with a few different masks, and this has not happened in my case. Okay, so actually I recorded that a couple of days ago, but I tried testing this again, and I found that the phone actually unlocks even though your face is completely covered, with only your eyes being visible to the camera of the phone. And I think that that's a very serious security issue, as somebody with just very similar eyes to yours might be able to unlock your phone even if you don't want them to, and that needs to be fixed. So yeah, hardware-wise, OnePlus 8 holds up pretty well despite the obvious few trade-offs that they had to make in order to achieve that price point. But even the greatest hardware on the planet doesn't get you anywhere with software that doesn't match it, or that doesn't hold up to it. Which is a field that OnePlus has always been known to crush with Oxygen OS, which is their version of Android, which is basically a very clean, stock Android experience with a few tweaks here and there to make it feel just a little bit more snappy, just a little bit more high quality. It's very minimal, it's very clean, and I like it a lot, as most people do that have owned a OnePlus phone. And that also gets very important in the long run, because you've seen like the older Samsung phones, like Samsung S6, 7, something like that, because over the time they got progressively slower because the software was just too filled with bloatware and stuff like that, stuff you don't really need, that just add weight to the software and make the phone cripple because of that. This does not happen with Oxygen OS. Alright, so who is OnePlus 8 actually for? I think it's for those people who want to have the classic OnePlus experience. Great phone, great hardware, great software at a upper mid-range price point. And those people obviously only who can deal with these trade-offs that have been made with this phone to achieve that price. Stuff like wireless charging and official IP rating, those things are missing on here. But those people who can live without those, I think that they would be very happy with this phone. However, at this price point you can also get other very great phones like Samsung S20, like a iPhone SE2, like a Pixel 4a. There's a great variety of phones at this price point that offer different things, that are great at different things. This is just an overall great performer that combines all the things and just gives you a very great experience overall. That said though, I actually wouldn't recommend you getting this because OnePlus 8T is just around the corner, and if you don't need a phone right now, then I'd suggest to wait until the launch event and make a decision then. So yeah, those are my thoughts on OnePlus 8. Is there anything that I left out? Is there anything you want to know still? If so, then please let me know in the comments below, and I'll make sure to answer your questions if you have any. And also, while you're at it, please let me know what I can do better, because I'm still learning. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed watching, and maybe I'm gonna see you in the next one. Peace.